All right. Did I turn it? Yes, it's on. Okay. Is he ready back there?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. This special meeting of the Judson Board of Trustees is hereby called to order at 5:10 p.m. I am very pleased that you have taken time to join us this evening. As the Judson Board of Trustees, we are here to set goals and policies and oversee the management of the district. We are responsible for approving budgets, contracts, personnel appointments, and to listen to reports from the superintendent. We are not here to make administrative or management decisions pertaining to the daily operations of the district. This is the responsibility of the superintendent. In compliance with the state government code on open meetings, tonight's agenda has been appropriately posted. This is a meeting in public, not a meeting of the public. As our guest, you are welcome to observe and listen. These proceedings are being video and audio recorded and will become part of Judson's permanent legal record. In order that the tape adequately reflects these proceedings, please silence your mobile devices and refrain from talking while others are speaking. Since it is legally mandated that these proceedings are recorded accurately, I may have to ask for order periodically should I notice that disruptions are interfering with our recording capabilities. Once again, I extend to each of you a sincere welcome from the entire school board. Thank you for your interest in Judson ISD. We have established a quorum, and I will call roll. Ms. Pichelle?
Ms. Michelle, present.
Thank you. Mr. Diaz?
Rafael Diaz present.
Ms. Eaton?
Deborah Eaton, present.
Ms. Canoyer?
Suzanne Canoyer, present.
Ms. King?
Tanya King,
And I am Jennifer Rodriguez, present, and to my right is Dr. Ball,
Hello.
and to my left is Ms. Patricia, who will be leading our session today.
Okay, good evening, friends. How are you?
Thanks.
Good. Fun.
Yeah.
Betty, was there any public comment? Okay, then we'll move on to item 3. Consider and take possible action regarding approving the superintendent's valuation instrument for the 2022-23 school year. Sorry,
It's actually 21, 22.
21-22 school year. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
What do you mean? No, it's 22.
It's actually for the 21, 22.
no, we did that.
The eval coming January is for what?
It's for the previous year?
It's for this year, because it doesn't, oh, they already did the one for last year.
Is it done in arrears? Is that what you're saying?
You did in last January, you would only had half a year.
Yeah, but that's how it, I mean, that's what, it was the 21, 22's.
The current superintendent's evaluation. Superintendent's current evaluation.
Okay, well, let's talk about the
Yeah.
instrument, because that'll be an important
Yeah.
piece of this, kind of maybe a change in the cycle. So we'll talk about that, and we'll figure that out. So this is kind of a couple of the final pieces that we put together in the full cycle of our governance framework, right, when we talk about progress and accountability. And so you guys, we've talked about reports, we've talked about, we've set your vision, you've set your values, all of this, and now monitoring progress, which is kind of done throughout the year. So thinking about that cycle is really what you've done for the superintendent and her team is you've kind of given her a goalpost of where to go, right? You did that as a board. You established those goals on the previous year, and then we revised them a little bit for the next year. And we've established a monitoring calendar so that we are measuring progress, and those are kind of like formative assessments throughout the year of the school district, and the school district and your superintendent under this framework are basically the same. They're evaluated under the same goals, and the constraints. And so those are your guardrails, and then we resource those goals. We resource it, and the board's role is to create the conditions for success through resourcing, through progress monitoring, through advocacy, all of those things. So that's just kind of a review of what we're doing. And the superintendent evaluation instrument, which is the only thing we're talking about tonight, is kind of that final piece of that cycle, right? And so we'll walk through that whole cycle just to make sure we all understand. I just wanted to remind us, this is kind of how we went, the systems and processes. These are the school board behaviors that are documented to improve student outcomes, and that's why we have this framework. So when we think about the steps for accountability, this is, I don't know what happened, I didn't do it. The steps for accountability, I don't know what to do here. Betty went on. We'll talk about it. So when we think about that, the cycle of accountability, you guys did your own evaluation, so you evaluated yourself, and that's usually, a board self-evaluation is usually 45 days before a superintendent evaluation, to make sure that you are holding yourselves accountable for the conditions that you set up for your superintendent to be successful. And then the step 2 would be to off from the previous year.
Okay.
So that would complete the cycle. So on your monitoring calendar, you get to see the constraints like 3 times a year, because you see the goal progress measures. You see the beginning of the year, you see the middle of the year, you see the end of the year. And then the goals are summative, right? They're star. And then the constraints have measurables as well. So those are your progress reports. So if we walked through that, let me give you an example of what a monitoring report might look like. You guys have been getting, if you'll just pass these down, what you guys have been getting is presentations, and you'll continue to get those presentations. Oh, sorry.
No, it was me.
But as we move forward, and this is just a sample, it's not yours, it's an example, okay? Well, actually, it might be one of yours, from last year. And so this would be an example of a summative report, and then you will get similar reports that will become part of your, am I short?
No.
You'll get similar reports for the constraints and the progress measures, and those become part of your board book. Okay, and so then all of these reports and presentations go behind your summative superintendent evaluation. So it isn't, okay, I'm not touching anything, so I don't.
I think it's Russ.
So it's maybe a little different from your previous instruments. And so this is a change to move towards evaluating your superintendent 100% on the goals that you set, the GPMs that she owns and established with her leadership team, the constraints, which are the priorities, the guardrails that you guys also set, and then the progress measures on those constraints, which she also owns in her team. And so there's 2 pieces to that puzzle. So does that make sense? Does the cycle make sense? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So doing it like you have been in January seems a little late, because you're either doing like half of one year and half of another year. I don't know how you're doing it, but since we have goals that are summative goals, it makes sense to evaluate your superintendent at the end of those summative goals.
With all that data, yeah.
Right. So for the sake of this instrument, let's think of it in terms of that you would be evaluating through this instrument, Dr. Ball, on the 21-22 data. Mm-hmm. Since we have all of that, correct? Now, what you didn't do is you didn't get all the reports, because we were kind of establishing that, but you have gotten reports on all of the goals and the constraints. You've seen everything. And so behind that superintendent evaluation would be all of those reports.
Right.
Okay? So I'm going to give you this. This is an example. This is not Judson's. This is an example of what a full summative report would look like. It's small, and I apologize for that. One more. Sorry. Do you have enough?
We need one more.
One more down there, sorry. So if we look at this, this would be kind of the sheet that gets signed. On the back of it would be the board president's signature, the board secretary's signature. So you would have all of that signed, and it would be the final report, along with comments that come from the board as a whole.
Okay.
So there is, while you can have your own individual comments, the feedback that you give to your superintendent comes from the board as a whole. You agree to it, you talk about it, you discuss these things, and then you write it up, and that's what you give back and have a discussion with Dr. Ball on. That's your feedback, so that Dr. Ball is not getting 7 different sets of feedback. She's getting one set of feedback from the board in its entirety. Does that make sense? So when we look at this, and I'm sorry again for it being so small, but you see that there's a goal, right? And then there's the progress measures underneath each goal. And so for this to be met, so if we think about goal number 1, for it to be met, for Dr. Ball to have met that goal on this instrument, this is again an example, you would look at, first of all, she would either have to meet the summative goal or she would need to meet 2/3 of the goal progress measures. And the reason that is an or is because, remember, first of all, we're trying to create the conditions, and so you guys set the goals. That's where you want your superintendent to be at the end of the year, and your superintendent and her leadership team gave you the progress that they're saying is indicative of that goal, right? So let's say, for instance, in this one, so if you were to look at, let's say, goal number 4. So on goal number 4, you can see on the summative goal here, the target was 56, but the actual was 45. So this superintendent did not meet that goal, summative goal. However,
Yeah.
this one met 3 out of the 4 goal progress measures, so that would be a met. That would be, and it's either a yes or a no. So does that make sense? Any questions?
Is the 2/3 met like something that this example board decided, or is that just like a standard rule of thumb, so to?
That is so it's a standard for this particular instrument.
Okay.
And so similar to TASB's, which is 75% is met, this is a 75% instrument as well. So it's very similar to TASB from that perspective. Yes, ma'am.
So Patricia, that means that before we would fill that out, the instrument, we have to meet and decide how she is to be evaluated.
No.
We would have to have a separate meeting.
Well, I'll walk through the timeline on it, but this is kind of what you would get. And there might be some, because we want Dr. Ball to also be able to provide narrative. So you're not just going to get this one sheet. This is the summative sheet, but you'll also get, get something like this. It doesn't have to be exactly like this. This is, once again, an example, which is like every goal, and then there's some space for evidence and accomplishments and places for you to write your notes. And then there might be a cover sheet with some additional things, but this, and it doesn't have to fit in this. Okay, I guess I didn't get
Sorry. I think an extra one got passed that way, but it might be for
Holding it
Jose.
for Jose. Yeah.
Got it, thank
Yeah.
you.
Obviously, Dr. Ball, you don't have to fit your narrative in this little deal, but the narrative is kind of the evidence and accomplishments around that goal or that constraint,
Like,
right?
here's how we got here.
How we got there, right? That goes back when we were looking at that earlier. It had the strategy. The strategy is Dr. Ball or any superintendent's priorities and the way they're getting to these goals and to these outcomes. And so you guys would get something like this, Trustee Pashal, for every, be a full packet, and behind it would be the monitoring reports. And then that summative, this whole sheet, And then Dr. Ball would get this sheet back with all of your notes as a board. Not the notes from each of your individuals. This is just be for you guys to write and share in your meeting. Then it would be, so Dr. Ball would come in, just like you would any other superintendent evaluation, and you would present your report. You would get this ahead of time, usually a week to 2 weeks ahead of time. You would have a meeting and a discussion with Dr. Ball regarding the instrument, regarding the numbers and the data and whatever is on this report. Having that discussion, Dr. Ball would then leave the room. You guys would, if you do it in the same night, you would have your own closed discussion. Obviously, these would all be closed meetings. Your own closed discussion to agree on the feedback, but the score is established. She either met or she didn't meet.
Yeah.
So you don't, at that meeting, you are not saying this is a met or not met. There's no subjectivity on this tool. It is an objective tool that is guided by the goals and constraints that you as a board have set and the progress measures which your superintendent has owned. So it is not a subjective tool. The feedback can be subjective based on the way that those goals were achieved, or if one wasn't achieved, what is that feedback? It can be around those, but that is feedback that goes on. So if you were to look at this instrument, out of the 8, 7 were met. So if 75% are yes, then it is a acceptable,
evaluation, yeah.
right, acceptable evaluation. Yes, ma'am.
So in the past, there were 3 categories, and I won't remember them all, but I remember if there's either exemplary, something in the middle, and needs improvement.
Proficient.
Oh, proficient, yes.
Yeah, that's what I want to know too. Go ahead.
So, it's okay. So it's no longer like that. So,
That's it.
so what would the what would be the end result?
Met or not met?
Okay,
Oh, that's it, oh.
okay.
So at 75%, it's met. Under 75%, it's not met. But once again, it's an either or,
Right.
and that threshold, that 75% is the same threshold that you've probably been using in the past because it's TASB's threshold as well. If the evaluation is not met, so let's say a superintendent only met 4 out of the 8, let's say there were 4, that's 50%, then the board would have to have a discussion about how they wanted to move forward. And that would be up to the board of how you wanted to move forward on that. If it's a met, obviously, then you would look at you would have your contract, you would look at all of that and think about that contract and how you would want to, if there's bonuses tied to any of this, if there's raises, you would look at all of those different things, just like you would any other normal evaluation. The difference between this tool and probably tools that you've used in the past is this takes the subjectivity out of the tool. It allows Dr. Ball and her team, first of all, what we did at the very beginning was we said, we want you here. We want to get our kids here in 5 years. And here's our annual targets. We want them here for 3rd grade literacy. We want them here for 3rd grade math. We want them here for 7th grade math, CCMR, right? We want it. And then you gave her constraints that said, these are the values that we want you to live within to get us there. So you set the goalposts, right? And so Dr. Ball has come to you and asked for money. She's deployed resources. She's hired staff. She's done different things to make sure she reaches those standards that you set for her. So this evaluation says you did or you didn't. And, depending where it is, that's what the board has to make a decision on. This is awesome. You got 100%. We're going to, renew your contract for 20 years, and we're going to give you, gillions of bonus money. Or, or it's, this is a great job. We love your work. We're going to keep going. Or, you know what? Maybe we didn't create the conditions. Maybe you're not quite at 75%. So let's talk about how we can do a better job too in collaboration with the superintendent. So there's this tool does not tell you how to move forward. It does tell you that you either met the standards and the goals that your board set for you at 75%, or you didn't. Does that make sense? Did you have a question?
I have a question for Dr. Ball. You look a little stressed. Do you like
Oh.
this too?
Oh, I'm just trying to process it all in. Just, yeah, just,
Well, I mean, because, could you share
sure.
maybe a little
So I'm just,
concern?
no, I'm not concerned, just trying to process everything. So, like, for example, this information, basically, these little blocks are just going to go right here. So the only change would be right here. And when you say evidence, I think of, well, the evidence is already here. What would be some examples of evidence when I think the data is the evidence? Could you
I
elaborate?
think for me, what I would maybe want to know is like your interpretation of how we got there. What made us successful? Or what, what is the narrative behind the numbers,
Yeah.
if that
Did
makes
How are
we
you
implement a
replicating
new
it?
program at the third grade level to assess with this? I'm just saying some off the top of my head. Like on here, it says they went from 31 to 37%, or whatever that is. But so did it occur because we implemented a new program?
Okay.
Or we hired extra, was it RTIs? You know what I'm saying?
So those are the kind of things that you would want.
And your team is already providing
Right,
this
we discussed that.
information,
Right,
right?
yeah.
And even in the presentations that they've given thus far,
Yeah.
you know.
talked about
They talk
the things
about
about-
what's working, what's not working, how is it,
Right.
what are we doing? So shouldn't be anything new to you guys,
Yeah.
either to the board or to the superintendent, right? That is also what makes this tool comprehensive, is it's, have been going through the year talking about goals and outcomes and resourcing things, and all of a sudden you get a superintendent evaluation that reads like a tactical plan that has really nothing to do with all of the things that you've been talking about in your boardroom all year long. This closes the cycle of the work that you as a board are doing and the expectations you have for the superintendent, and also allows the superintendent to know exactly where she's supposed to go. Yes.
I just wanted to say, I like this. I like this because it takes away guesswork. Trying to remember, well, what happened with that? Because this is, to just my opinion, it's so clear cut.
Right.
We gave you a goal, we asked for this percentage, it happened, or it didn't happen. And I think having the opportunity to, the example you gave with here, number 4, I'm trying to read or look without glasses. I have new glasses, forgive me. Number 4, it's a yes because 3 out of the 4 little goals, they were met. And to me, that's good. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So you're not browbeating somebody over one little point that maybe one person on the board disagrees with.
Right.
This is so clear cut.
And that's what it's designed to do. And it is the culmination of the framework we've been working on the whole time together. And getting all the pieces in place is what's going to even clarify it more. But also remembering that, so in this particular superintendent, they missed this goal. So maybe there's feedback around that, right? Maybe there's discussion around that. There's, if I were to give you that, if I were the superintendent and I gave you my report, I would explain why. I would explain what happened, well, we bought a new curriculum. We weren't allowed to get it implemented in time. We are confident we'll meet our 5-year goal, but we didn't make it this year. But we've put everything in place to get there.
Now, will
There's reasons behind it. I'm sorry? Yeah, go ahead.
Will the superintendent fill out this too?
Yes.
So that's what she'll clarify, anything that she wants to clarify for us?
The superintendent will fill out the evidence and accomplishments, which are already come in from the reports. All of the rest of the data will be filled in.
And has
And-
already been presented to us.
And has already been presented. And so,
In real life, not
Right,
just
right.
like
No, I like
in
it.
theory.
I like
and verified.
Yeah.
So all of that data will be verified
Come in here and screw it up.
and with Dr. Ball's leadership team, right? And so it'll all be, she will have the last look at this document to make sure it looks like what she, that these are the right numbers.
And I see here that there's board comments, so since we would each be getting one, this is where our comments would go.
Yeah, that's where you might write your notes. And then when you come into your dialogue, you might have questions that you want to ask Dr. Ball, or you might have questions you want to talk with each other about, because then your comments, which, you know, as any leader, I'm sure Dr. Ball wants this as well, you want feedback, right? We want to, continuous improvement is the goal for all of this. And so it's not just continuous improvement for Dr. Ball, it's continuous improvement for the board. Did we create the conditions for success? Did we resource these goals in the way that you needed? You know, there could be, Dr. Ball could, or a superintendent could come back and say, the reason I struggled with this goal is because we came to the board and we asked you to fund this new tool that we felt we needed to help our teachers get to the next level, and it did not get passed in the budget. And the board needs to own that, right? And understand that and have a dialogue about it and a discussion, because that's what board work is, right? And so that is how that kind of resourcing and creating the conditions ties those accountability steps. It's not just accountability for our students, it's not just accountability for our teachers, it's not just accountability for our superintendent, it's also accountability for the board to hold themselves accountable for creating the pathway for kids to be successful. And when we think about that from a board perspective, boards have tools, right? You have resources, you have policy, and you can establish practice just through your goals by saying, you know, if we want to get to this, that's a practice goal. And thinking in terms of those tools, like what is going to correlate with improvement in outcomes for kids? What is going to be, you know, policy might correlate to, like, if you created a policy that said, we're going to allow kids to go to any school they want in our whole district, or an equity policy, or something like that, that you created as at the policy level, while that's not a direct cause, perhaps, of an improved outcome for a child, it does have a correlation to an improved outcome. And that is a tool that is at your disposal, right? So when you're thinking about these, and, you know, whereas you improve, like if you increase teacher pay, it might be a cause of improved teaching, it might not, you know, I don't know. There's causality and correlation, right? But boards have to think about both of those, and then you have to build your framework to help your superintendent be successful in that. And that is the board work that actually improves student success, because you're constantly thinking about what do we need to do to create the experience, the graduate profile, the resources for our kids to be successful. And so this tool is a culmination of that. And because the superintendent isn't separate from the school district in terms of the board, it is a culmination of your evaluation of your superintendent.
And in your experience, do you see a lot of boards going this route, using this an instrument similar to this one, or?
What we're seeing is, so we're seeing kind of a high, yes, the boards that are very committed to the framework are moving towards this tool, because it does take the subjectivity out, and because it has so much, the work is done collaboratively, the goals are set collaboratively, superintendents also want some of that subjectivity taken out of their evaluation. Boards who are maybe transitioning, or superintendents who are transitioning or like the old way, are doing more of a hybrid. So maybe they have some objectivity, like maybe this is 50% of their evaluation and 50% is based on something else, other things. But my ask to you guys as a board, just like it would be an ask to any board, is if you are going to do that, then you need to be upfront with your superintendent to say, these are the expectations. This is a pretty upfront tool, right? Dr. Ball knows exactly what she's up against here, right? if you also say then we're going to give you 50% on some subjective ruling and we're not going to tell you what that is until we get to your evaluation, that does not seem fair or productive to me.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's kind of the way that it's been done in the past in a lot of ways. Not always, but, just trying to take some of that out of the
Yeah.
equation.
I mean, I wouldn't want to be evaluated like that, because you don't know what it is.
Right,
What you're working toward, or what you are or aren't doing.
right.
And I think that's why, when we started on this process, and I remember there was, in one of our first meetings, it was okay, let's talk about the superintendent's evaluation. And I think we were all kind of on very different pages, but now I'm hearing more consensus,
Well, it's
okay,
making
this is-
sense now.
Yeah, now we understand, okay, we've been talking about these goals for a long time. It doesn't seem unfair to hold you to that standard. And it's also not oh, if you get a no on a category or two, that there's it's not a punishment, right? It just is the basis for a discussion where we all understand the same starting point.
Right.
So,
I feel like this really makes it more team of 8 again. And not, us versus her.
Right.
And I really like the fact that, it's something that we, like you said, we've all collaborated on. Every one of us had input and discussion, and she was able to bring her team in to give that perspective. So I'm very happy with this.
Yeah.
I like it.
Good.
She can't be blindsided.
Yeah.
no, yeah.
I'm not sitting.
Well, and
And at this point now, she has, we've given the goals. We know the expectations, she knows the expectations, so things can't be I didn't have enough time, I was frustrated, all those comments that came before that she was blindsided with, that won't be happening.
right. It'll be hopefully productive. I mean, no board hires a superintendent and wants them to fail, right? You hire a superintendent because you want to get them to the place and you want them to help get your children to where you want them to go. So that's kind of the culmination of this cycle. And then kind of the next steps, and this is why we do this at the beginning of the year, is because then you got to reset the targets. So in our last meeting, I think Mary came and gave you new goal targets, and I think you're going to get some new constraint targets in the next meeting. Those are to set up the 22-23
Right.
evaluation, right? Because they met them. You met the targets, so we don't want to, we're not going to move the 5-year targets unless you were to exceed those, right? But annual targets, if your leadership, your superintendent, your school district meets those annual targets, then the board needs to reset. And I would not encourage you, now I'm not saying you can't, but I would not encourage you to change your goals. Those should stay, but your constraints are your priorities. And those actually you can look at those every year because it's normal for school districts to have changing value priorities,
And how about the GPMs too, right?
The GPMs, those targets all change as well. And you can look at them and say, the board could come and I think we did this on the CCMR, right? GPM, and if you remember from Mary's presentation, there wasn't quite enough depth in those CCMR progress measures. So Dr. Ball and her team added some depth to that progress measure so that, that are more indicative and predictive of the goal.
And when would be the good time to also adjust the monitoring calendar? Because today we had a Zoom with the commissioner and some things are going to change in regards to release dates. So we're used to in the summer. Would you suggest the spring or?
I would say that we could probably do all of that in the fall, adjust it, make any adjustments. You could also do it in the spring. It really doesn't matter. I mean, or in the summer, maybe looking forward, you could adjust it in June.
Yeah, because he was saying today how the accountability now won't come up till October.
Oh, my
Yeah.
gosh. Yeah, they got to grade all those short answers.
So, in that case, as we're shifting, so November becomes a pretty optimal month to evaluate your superintendent. And the targets can be reset still earlier, because that's the next year's we're talking about. And so, although I know that January is a common time, and I'm not sure why January became a common time for superintendent evaluation, never has made sense to me, but because you're kind of evaluated on 2 separate years.
The only reason I would still suggest January is because let's say what he shared today does work out and he says October, then it gives us November to share that information with the board, then me to put this together in December, then do the evaluation. So that's just my suggestion. So that's what he was sharing today.
So you guys can pick the timeline. The advantage of this instrument is you don't have to write a book, right? Like, you're not putting a whole giant presentation together, so it won't take you quite as long to do that. But the timeline is up to you guys. I have a sample timeline that I based on if you were to want to do it in November. It's just a sample. It's that's all of your decision, and either way works. Either way it works. But you can see how tight this timeline is, and see how that feels to you. If you wait till January, then that's fine. But the January evaluation will be on the 21-22 numbers. It won't be on the 22-23 because you won't have summative numbers.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's fine if you wait till that long. It's just whatever you guys decide.
I'm just going to look at my phone for some like dates looking at this. So it would actually be next Friday that the board, when you say evaluation packets, it would be this.
It would be this.
These two things.
And this is completed.
Right, yeah, we worked on this together.
Yeah, right, we worked on that, yeah.
Okay.
So this is current.
We have
That's
all-
an example.
Right.
No, that is not yours.
But we do have all of ours.
Okay.
This is open, so we are not, yeah.
So that's already done.
It's finished.
So what needs to get done?
I would then
Just her
transfer
comment.
this and then make,
Do the comments, yeah.
so then November 11th, I get that to the board. And then they have until the 16th to review it. I hope,
That's Veterans Day.
yes, ma'am, but that's okay. I can still get it to you, that's okay.
I won't receive it to the 12th.
Sure.
Yeah, we'll have time to review it before we do.
I'm going to be out of town that
Yeah.
whole
Oh,
weekend.
Me too, yeah.
This is tight, and so if you don't, I mean, it's just,
Actually, I think this looks great. Patricia, you did a great job with this timeline.
You can manage all this? Okay, good.
Let me just ask some clarifying questions after everybody's had some time to read it.
And the November 17th meeting is the regularly scheduled
Yes.
board meeting.
board meeting, yep.
Could you tell me a little bit more about the study session?
Well, the study session, that would just be an executive session, it'd be like a session, that would be where you and the board had your discussion. And because some boards have study sessions and then board meetings, but yours would have to be a special.
Okay. So we would have then a special board meeting on the 16th.
That would be executive session.
Okay. Yep. And that date definitely works for me also, so that's not a problem.
And then at the board meeting, it's just a matter of the vote,
Right.
of
And-
accepting it.
Okay, so just to double check, so at the study session, basically, I'm just giving the same information again, because the board has already seen this, they've seen the presentations. I'm basically talking just about this evidence, right? Just
Yeah, and just for them to ask you questions and just a discussion, really.
And in closed session.
Yes. And that's where you could bring in any proposed modifications to your contract. You could bring any of that, goes into that discussion.
I can make this happen. I mean, for me, I can definitely do these dates.
But if it feels too fast for the board, and I don't know if your board, like, some boards like email copies of these kind of packets, some want them hand-delivered, some want,
And I can do both.
okay. So it's whatever your
Yeah.
your
The
board
board
feels.
is really good, I think, technology-wise, so, but if anybody wanted a copy, we could get you a copy.
How does the board feel about this type of a timeline? Does this feel rushed? Does this feel, well, first of all, you have to agree as a board that this is the tool you would want to use, the instrument.
Yes.
Yes.
And would the board formally vote today?
I
Because
I
it
think
is-
the
it-
board should vote.
Yeah, I think it's
It's
an
in
action item.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, I think we'll have to catch Mr. Macias up. I texted him again to see if he's on his way.
As long as this timeline is okay for you, Dr.
Oh, yes, I can make it
I'm cool
happen.
with it.
Yeah, I can make it happen,
Okay.
because I have all this information. I have, and I'm looking at you like, am I
You have the
thinking,
template.
right?
Yeah.
You know, I have all this because it goes from here, I can write this part, give it to the board.
I
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
that document.
Yeah, if
For you.
if
Yeah.
it's a Word document or Excel or whatever, I could just plug that
So
in.
you're going to email that to us?
Yes, ma'am.
And then for board comments, we would, between November 11th and November 16th, like, write our comments down. And then part of that executive session would be us synthesizing the comments so that when we have the final instrument, it's coming from the board, not from individuals. Is that
Exactly.
correct? Okay.
That's correct. And there is nothing that I will, look, board members can always give their superintendent feedback. There is nothing that says you
Right.
cannot give feedback. My suggestion is that you provide it as a board, and the advice that I think, your superintendent will either look at your feedback or won't look at your feedback, but will look at your whole board's feedback. I mean,
Right.
individual feedback is what I'm saying. So that's why we do it that way, because you should be evaluating your superintendent as one body.
Yep.
So I'd like to know, then, do we need to change any wording in our policies since we are changing the protocol?
Yeah, your policy needs to be updated. Your operating procedures?
Yes.
Yes.
So could,
It doesn't have to be before this,
Okay, I was just gonna-
but it should be,
All right.
there's quite a few little updates that we probably need.
and will you help me work on that, and would it be okay to still do it on the November board meeting?
The operating procedures?
Oh, no, I misunderstood, sorry.
Okay.
I thought we were talking about the policy for evaluation. I'm so sorry, I misunderstood.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, I know we could update the policy.
Y'all were talking about board operating procedures?
Yeah, but it is in
Okay,
local
sorry.
policy too. It's just right now you have the
General,
TASB
generic.
3-line generic one.
Talking about that timeline.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I misunderstood.
Yeah, the timeline doesn't have to be, it can be put in policy. It can be as detailed in policy or,
I don't think we should do that, because if something happens and we can't do it, and have to wait the next month or something, then you done screwed up everybody.
Well,
Yeah.
Or if something
I-
what I was
like
thinking
COVID
about-
happens again,
What I was thinking about, Ms. Eaton, is any board, maybe not us, but whatever board comes after us, that it would be written. And they can change it. Another board can change it to make it fit them. But I was just wanting to know if we would need to put it in writing since we are changing it to
Right.
fit this particular circumstance.
well, and it's always a good practice to update your policy so that it is then it's policy, right? Like that if this board were to change or whatever, there is a policy that says we evaluate our superintendent on this timeline by this instrument.
Yeah.
And this is what we do.
Following the other one.
Yeah.
And not knowing until we heard now
Right.
Right,
that wasn't the appropriate time for us to be doing.
right. And
So
some,
we've been following what other boards have done.
right. And some boards, like on their books, they have multiple evaluations of their superintendent. And
Absolutely.
I would argue that every single month is a formative assessment of your superintendent. That's why we want you to spend 50% of your board meetings talking about student outcomes and constraints, because that is your formative assessment. Because you're not talking about summative goals on those, you're talking about GPMs, you're talking about progress.
Okay. That'll work.
What other questions or concerns? How does, let me ask you this question, then we're going to kind of tie it all up in a bow. How does this report feel to you as a monitoring report? You would still get the presentations that you get, but you would always, whatever goal you're talking about, or GPM or CPM you're talking about, you would have this in your board book, so you would get it ahead of time, and that would be public document, which is also important because then your community also sees this. So does this feel comprehensive? I don't, what we've tried to strive for is it's not too complicated that you won't look at it, but it gives you all the information you need.
I like it. One thing, though, that I'm wondering about is that we've asked sometimes, like, in the presentations is schools, how individual campuses are doing, because that can give us some insights. But I also understand that that might be sensitive to do in a public meeting or something. So I'm curious, I'm curious about if you have a thought on that, or if you have a recommendation about particular, like at the campus level.
Ultimately, what I would suggest is, of course, you could have that data behind this, but you're right, it could be sensitive. You could ask for that report in your presentation. But what I really love, and this is maybe another step, as districts grow and level up, then you create a data dashboard that the board can access and dive in and see campuses from the goal perspective or the GPM perspective, so that you could look at whatever campus you wanted to look at. Now, that's a little more sophisticated tool, so.
That might be something where we need a data department to
Yes.
do
I
that.
love this.
I
Yeah.
do too.
Yeah, it's very clean.
I love this. I think it's concise. It gives all the information. So my question to you and then to the board would be is, could it just be this, that this is what is presented like this in a clear format?
Well, I think the board needs to ask themselves, a lot of times, then the presentation should be the evidence. It should be that's where the dialogue, the discussion comes. I wouldn't want, now, if you're on target and everything's rosy, then I think if I were a board member, my question might be, well, how are we replicating this? And where are we missing it? Oh, wait, well, so we're still struggling with this student population. How can we address that? So then that would be the dialogue in the presentation that I would want to see, but I don't think presentations should need to be more than 3 or 4 slides.
Right. So just to make sure I understand correctly, so do you feel that this doesn't give enough information to create that dialogue?
I don't know if it gives enough,
Because we could definitely elaborate on the evidence here. I know this is a sample.
Yeah.
But we could definitely elaborate, more on the evidence and future plans, which I think this might create more of the dialogue, but I'm truly just asking the
yeah.
question.
What do you guys think?
I think it's simplified enough that it would enhance a discussion. I think it's simplified enough
In
that,
addition to or solely?
as far as presentations go, I think it would be in addition to, not just solely.
Okay.
And as
So-
long,
Go ahead.
Go ahead. You finished? Okay, and as long as, what you were asking about, Jennifer, I think you.
I said campus data
Right,
is
as long
something
as
that
that
often gets asked.
information is available that we can access, then, and then that way, if we look at by campuses and we see something we're concerned about, then we can discuss it with the superintendent, that would be great. Because if you put that kind of stuff on here, then what we're gonna have, since they have the ability to enroll in any of our schools, you're gonna have people pulling their kids out of one school and, well, I want them all over here, you know, and all.
Oh, you mean after they see this stuff?
Yeah, if we go by campus. So I
Oh,
think
yeah.
like this, we can talk about it in closed session as far as per campus, you know, but
Right.
if need be. But this is enough information that we get the public, because they get confused easily.
But wouldn't that stifle
Did I say that?
parental involvement? I mean, if we always talk about things at a campus level in private,
They trust me. They come to the campus and they request information.
but not all parents.
Well, the ones that want to know, I've been hearing really
That's sort of the
wild stuff.
philosophical question, like, do we just cater to the ones that already do it? Or do we have conversations that create the right forum for parents to learn on how to advocate for themselves and for their children, and then learn in the process?
But we're going to have people moving their children, trust me.
That's kind of a parent's choice.
When we don't have the room, then what?
Well, that's a separate conversation to have on how to solve that,
Okay?
but
Because we've already
Yeah.
seen that happen,
sure.
okay? And we had a little issue with it. So it's going to be available for us.
Yeah, but my question is, don't we want it available
No.
to interested parties, parents?
If they want to go up to their school and discuss it with their principal,
But didn't you say that it could be like on that campus website or something like that?
We'd have to
That
build
that the
that,
campus would,
Yeah, we'd have to build it out.
I mean, let's face it, most of this is public
Yeah.
information
Right.
already. You can find campus-level
That's what I'm
information
saying.
on
So
3 or 4 sites.
we don't have to get
But
them again.
I think, I understand what you're saying, absolutely, but I would always recommend transparency.
Mm-hmm.
Your community deserves to know what's happening, and they
But
care.
you just said
And
it's
so-
it's in 2 or 3 different places, right? So
I'm
why
sorry?
do we need to put it in a 4th place?
Not all of the gold progress measure stuff will be out there that they can access. The things that, you know, are beginning, middle, and end of year screeners and things like that aren't necessarily out there for them to see.
And so when you had a constraint presentation, a presentation on your constraint that had increasing A and B schools, you, in your board book, had a document that showed the grades for every single campus.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that was a public document.
right?
For anybody who was watching the board. And, you know, there are some folks that have a place on their website that gives the goals, gives the progress measures, talks about those type of things. There are very few, even big school districts, that have their own public-facing dashboard. But, you know, you should know, as board members should also know where, you know, what's happening in every campus in your district. That's, if you look back at, you know, when we did our evaluation, there's a question in here that says, do you know where your failing schools are? Do you know where, you know, what? And that's an important, so having a dashboard that is accessible for you guys is something you could aspire to. It's, you know, I would say that that's a resource allocation that you would, as a board, would have to decide, is it worth resourcing a data person who could, you know, build that out?
Yeah.
And also help your, I mean, because there is a lot of data that goes with this, and especially the GPMs, you know, it's a lot to ask folks that are also having to work with every teacher and every principal, and to look at that data, to figure out the trends, to do all of that. They have to do basically 2 jobs. So, you know, Ceci and Mary are doing that work. And so how could you support that? Because all of these, remembering too, that, you know, the cool thing about the GPMs and the CPMs is those are dropped down to campus level goals. That should never be data that you shouldn't be looking at anyway. I mean, the superintendent and her team are probably looking at that on a daily basis with their teams, with their principals, with their teachers. So it should be looked at. So you haven't asked for anything that isn't part of the daily work of evaluating trends and continuous improvement.
So I think just to make sure, so we will, using last board meeting as an example and what Mary provided, we'll continue with those types of report to include the campus and add this one as an additional.
I didn't hear that all the campus information needs to be included, but that's up to the board.
So I just want to put that out there and see.
Well, that would really make it a long presentation.
Yeah.
This
When
is,
we
Well,
can
it
just
would just be a
access it.
report.
Yeah,
Right,
she
and-
doesn't
and
have
I-
to present it.
To just give it as a
Right.
report.
Okay, I
Yeah.
just wanted
Yeah.
clarification.
Yeah.
Okay, made available.
right.
Yes.
Made available. Okay.
And I think, to me, this is like a summary page. This is a one-pager of the presentation,
Okay.
so to speak. You know, this is like, here it is. And I think something that I did like and is helpful and was seeing where that performance stood in relation to previous years. You know, like, are we on a growth track? Or, you know, I think she did that in the last one, and that helps contextualize. But it doesn't have to be elaborate. It can be like, here's one thing, here's one slide that shows the last 3 years and on these different categories or something.
And the other thing that this does, having this, you know, if you put it in your board binder,
Yeah.
right? And you have it with you, when you get to budget discussions, okay, we were missing it here. And so where's the resource item that you need to get us
Right.
on track, right? You have this kind of, now it becomes, budgeting is not just looking at a bunch of numbers, it's resourcing the goals. It's resourcing your vision and values as a district. So it's process driven. And that makes the budgeting process, to me, for a board, so much more, like it makes so much more sense, right? As opposed to just, okay, we spent this much last year, we're going to spend this much this year, but what does this mean in terms of where our students are and where they're going?
Excellent.
So I think that this can also be great background for that reports, those results.
Absolutely.
What other questions? On the overall tool, the summative tool, does this make sense? So you would get it, it'd be filled out, there would be no subjectivity. It would say yes or no. And you do understand what I talked about with the CPMs and the goal? Okay.
Yes.
And then overall, the overall is 75%. Now, if you want to have different standard levels, that's up to you, but that's the recommendation.
Would it make sense for us to recess to eat? And I can call Mr. Macias and see if he's on his way.
As opposed to,
As I don't want to go like, okay, we've made the decision, or is this the kind of thing that like he's absent, we can vote on it and, this is a question for Patricia, I think, too. Is this something that requires a full board to vote on it, or?
Well, it's like any action. Obviously, a quorum can make it pass, but in this case, it's recommended
right,
that
we will
your
all
whole
team it.
board is
Yeah,
on the same
exactly.
page on this.
Agree.
so yeah, we can break.
Yeah, I think it's a nice, our meals are here, we can eat, and, all right, so, the board is, the time is now 6:09. We're going to recess and take a break, and we'll come back together in 15 minutes?
15 minutes?
Okay, yeah, so we'll come back together at 6:25.
I'm calling him now.
Thank you. Yeah, because he called me like at 5 and said he was ready. All right. The time is now 6:27. We're going to come back from recess. Let the record show that during our recess, Mr. Macias arrived, so we now have a full board. And so we'll go back to the discussion and consideration of action items on taking possible action regarding approving the superintendent's evaluation instrument. We are now in agreement that this is the 21-22 the evaluation of the 21-22 school year that will occur during the 22-23, but it's looking back at that school year. Before we decide to take a vote on the evaluation, are there any further clarifying questions? I know we were able to loop Mr. Macias in on what he missed on that. Was there any other questions or discussions around the instrument?
I just would like to clarify. I just would like to clarify that, Dr. Ball, you're okay with this timeline, and we're going to move forward with this timeline.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am, I am.
Okay.
And for the record, obviously, I appreciate being briefed up. I think the timeline is perfect. It sounds like this is really a very comprehensive and collective evaluation for the superintendent.
Yes.
But I think what I like most about all of this is that November, October timeline, because obviously we get the results from the TEA regarding evaluations, so we can evaluate a superintendent basically on time on what those records look like. So
Yep.
anyway, I'm quite happy with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. In order to have this, we need to vote on it to show what the board is agreeing to. Is there a motion?
I move we approve the superintendent's evaluation instrument and the timeline as presented.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. I'll do a roll call vote, and I'll go this way around. Mr. Macias?
I vote yes.
Thank you. Ms. Pichelle?
Renee Pichelle, aye.
Mr. Diaz?
Rafa Diaz, aye.
Ms. King?
Tanya King, aye.
Ms. Canoyer?
Suzanne Canoyer, aye.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Eaton voted aye, and in case the microphone didn't pick that up, and I, Jennifer Rodriguez, vote aye, so that motion passes unanimously. Okay. So the next item on the agenda, we do not need to go into closed session because we discussed all of that in open session. And so the next item on the agenda is number 6, 2022-23 Board Committee discussion. So I know we're all on board with restructuring our committees to have them be board committees, but it's been a little hard to get started. Because this is our first time doing it. And so Patricia and I discussed bringing this to this training so that we can talk about that and see if there's any support folks need, or if it's just a matter of having a space to talk about here's the date, here's a good date for getting that committee together. So Patricia, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I know that it's been so busy for all of you, and it always is. And a couple of these committees have January due dates, and so that seems like it might be a little tight, so you might want to reconsider those dates. And just, even if you just meet with your other committee members to set like your goals for your first meeting, or the goals. And so I did provide you with a goal-setting worksheet that may be helpful. It's something that I actually adapted from the Management Center, which is just a good little resource. And so just to kind of sit together with your fellow board members on your committee, if it's obviously more than 4 or more, then you need to do that publicly. If it's not, then you could do it via call or something just to get you started. And then also talk about moving the due dates on a couple of those. I think the Innovation Committee has a June due date, which is further down the path. Obviously, the Legislative Committee you can't move it too much further because, but you could identify maybe a couple of topics that are important to you and maybe meet with your community to talk about those as well. So I just wanted to make myself available if anybody needed help or resources as we were getting those things started. Or answer any questions. Anything I missed?
Would it be possible, oh, sorry, let me turn this back on. Would it be possible for us to use a little work time during this training? Is that within the realms of the way that this agenda item is posted? To be able to say like, okay, we're going to sit in little groups as we've done before in trainings and say like, okay, let's come to a consensus about what our first meeting date would be, maybe do a first pass at the goals.
I think that's a great idea. I think
Okay.
a couple of you are on multiple
Yeah.
committees, so you'll have to we'll have to kind of figure that, do a little round
Yeah.
robin, but certainly, and there's, a couple of things as you're doing that too to think about, like what has come up in your discussions, in your board discussions that, might fit in some of these committees. So for instance, I will just share kind of a feedback that I had gotten on your last couple of board meetings is I heard some questions about process, specifically process around like vendor selection. And, there was a lot of dialogue around that. And I know that you've had to make some really important selections. And so, maybe in that audit planning committee, there's some discussion about that. Like maybe there is a process that you need to talk about that is differently. That's a perfect place to kind of set, to have that, to take it out of your board committee, your board meeting, talk about it in a smaller group, and then introduce that back to your board meeting publicly to say, this is the recommendations we'd like to have. What do y'all think? So same with the innovation committee where I think we've met, Trustee King and I have met a couple of times. I think you've got a good plan moving forward to, all of these committees, especially things like the innovation committee, that's a big 10,000-foot look, right? That's not trying to replace what the innovation person is doing. It's to do it collaboratively, but it's also to make sure that you as a board understand those different ways that you could go with your district to innovate, because it's going to come up in budgeting discussions. So it's kind of the committees are deeper dives. Those are for you guys to talk deeper so that you can come back with kind of the framework to the full board. So, any other questions? So do you want to kind of break up and?
Yeah, why don't we do this? Why don't we have Mr. Macias and Mr. Diaz pair up and talk about the audit committee for a little bit? And then me, Ms. King, and Ms. Knoyer can talk about innovation, and Ms. Bichelle and Ms. Eaton talk about the legislative committee, and like maybe in the next 15 minutes come up with like, here's a date for the first meeting. If we need to reevaluate the due date, that you have a suggestion for that. And maybe a couple of goals sketched out for what the committee might accomplish within the time frame given. Does that seem right?
Okay.
So first meeting, revised due date if necessary, and a couple of ideas about goals. Sound good?
Okay.
Okay.
And if anybody has questions or wants me to join in, otherwise I'll stay put.
And me too, if y'all need any information or if I can help with anything, let me know.
Want to come over here, Jen?
You want me to come over there and?
I'll come over there.
Yes, sir. Yes, I just split it up this way because she's the head of the innovation committee, and so then you can come over and ask her about any decisions, but. We're just getting started, because there's a couple of people who are on multiple committees.
Oh, we need a calendar or?
Yes,
Because
and
ours is January 9th.
Yep. So, go to my calendar. Where's January?
I think the hardest person to get is gonna be Mr. Diaz, because I'm pretty flexible.
Me too. And right now, saying January the 9th and knowing that I don't have anything on that day, I can say yes on a
Well,
Monday.
for a due date, that's the due date. So we gotta meet before then. This is a Monday.
And, okay.
You see
Because
what
I'm,
I'm saying?
because, yeah. Because
So
I
the
can see
hardest
I don't
is
have
gonna be
anything.
him.
Uh-huh. So, did Patricia send you on today? Patricia, did you send me that information this week or last week?
This week.
Okay.
And that was, I was gonna just share with you guys,
And I think June is still a good time. Just because like if everybody new will actually ready for next school year, you know. And then we can reevaluate.
And this may be an
Right. I think, on that, Facebook group. You like all the sides? It's hard to keep up. They're good.
And it was a better time to get her contact on. What's in play, what you're working on.
What we said is like, we're looking at the week after Thanksgiving and having sex become. So, well,
Depends on her availability too.
we're gonna
What week, oh, yeah. Of November, right? Right. So do you want me to ask her what day she's available that week?
Yeah.
You leaving?
Tanya was going to email.
Oh,
Just kind of give her a heads up about what we want.
okay. Okay, I'll text her right now that you're gonna email her.
But to look at her calendar.
Yep.
All good. You guys do it, and then just
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, aren't you on their committee too?
Yeah. And does she have any asks? Anything that we can look at as an assistance?
Is there knowledge she wants to
Right.
build? Because something that Tanya and I talked about with Patricia was like scheduling meetings in schools.
Yeah.
Of like strong, innovative schools
Right.
in San Antonio. And of our schools, our innovation schools that we've already
Right.
started here to see how they're doing. So, yeah.
And I think maybe one of the, it just came to me, one of the goals we want to talk about is an evaluation process for those in the schools. How are we determining is that working? So maybe having a little or something.
Yeah.
So that would be in conjunction.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I need her expertise. That's the. We can also bring back information, like when we go to conferences and things like that. To share that.
Yes, ma'am.
Whatever you send me, send it them too.
Okay. And I'll resend that other one.
Did you send it to her or just?
Yes, we heard.
I think I maybe just sent it to you. Trick or treat.
It's just changes are like you.
Do you mind sending me the handouts that way I'm on the same page with y'all? Because I know y'all were talking about timelines and stuff, and I'm totally off kilter.
Or do you want me to
Sure.
hand them to you?
Either or, I don't care. Because I'm gonna put them in my file,
Well,
but I'm also going to
these
look at
handouts
it.
are only examples. They're not,
Okay.
they're not
Okay,
Justin's tool.
okay. But what about the timeline?
The timeline.
Okay,
you can have
yes,
that.
okay.
Is that the right one? Did I give you the right one?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. So are we actually, we're calling a meeting on November 16th? Okay.
That's what they all said they would do. It's not gonna be a long meeting, and it'll be closed.
The whole meeting? Pretty much, okay.
It's gonna be their evaluation and discussion, first with the superintendent, presentation of it, and then discussion, and then their own discussion. Yes. And then hopefully the action will then come into the, you could do the feedback session as the closed session of the actual meeting.
Yeah, and I just texted her, she hasn't replied, but just so she
That they
knows what it's about.
So
Yeah,
they'll have.
no, just so she knows what it's about. I just sent it to her.
So you could
They'll be
still have another closed session on this if you needed it on this November 17th board meeting, if you didn't
So we
finish it
won't
off.
have any, we'll start in closed, we'll go immediately into closed, and then coming out of closed, they'll have discussion and action, or
No.
just more discussion?
No discussion. out of close. This will only be on the superintendent evaluation.
Okay, so then they just come open and take
Open
action?
and go.
Okay.
And they can either take action on that night, or they can take action on the,
We'll add it to the
November
17th, the next
17th.
day, okay. Because I'm going to post,
And you're going to add that we're going to have a special board meeting on the November 16th.
yes, that's what
Okay.
we're, yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay.
better put it on my calendar right
Yes,
now.
I'll
so
do that right
yeah.
now. No, I'm going to do that right now because everybody said yes.
but
Yes.
that meeting is a closed meeting.
Right, it's
Just
closed
a closed session.
Yeah.
So we're doing this time too, 5:30 to 6:30?
And no action would be taken, right? Like,
Well,
it would
you
just
have,
be-
you do need to have an action that comes back that you accept the superintendent's evaluation.
Okay.
Right, and then if you have to, if, whatever the same kind of thing is, if you bring the contract back into it, that's. what
Right,
you do,
right.
Because then this piece would be with the signatures on
Yeah.
it, which I'll send, would be
Yeah.
public document.
Yeah, okay. We would do the contract stuff the next day in the regular meeting, right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah, okay. So then I'm just thinking about like coordinating with Walsh and
Yeah.
stuff about having somebody there.
I keep smelling Chinese food.
Me too.
Maybe it's
I know, it's Greek food though.
Yeah, that's true.
Some that smells like Chinese food.
I don't know.
And that's really all nice.
Okay, great. I might get home before my husband.
Yeah, there you go.
I was gonna say, since we're already done.
Okay. All right, so it looks like our groups are, have finished. So I'm just going to go around and have each group share if there are any updates or changes. And then I think we'll be ready to adjourn. So Mr. Macias and Mr. Diaz, what would you like to share?
Yes, I spoke with Mr. Diaz, and we kind of reviewed the timeline. It looks like the only adjustment we'll have will be for, instead of a January deliverable, it'll be February.
Okay.
But we certainly feel that we can have the Internal Audit Committee on task.
Okay.
I think we realize that there's an emphasis to really make a concerted effort to hire someone internally, or a employee, if you
Okay.
will, for an internal audit position before we look at any other options. So February, we're still on target.
Okay.
1 month
And
out.
did you set a date for your first meeting, or are you still working on that?
We will probably set that date sometime in early December.
Okay.
But the timeline of completing the task, I think, to bring it back to the full board is still for February rather
Okay.
than January.
Thank you. Ms. King, would you like to report for the Innovation Committee?
Yes, the Innovation Committee agreed to have an introduction meeting with Judson ISD's Chief Innovation Officer, just to get some information from her and kind of be on the same page. And so we were looking at meeting by the end of November. So we're still trying to get a date and time planned for that meeting to occur. And then after that, we'll be able to have some goals produced from that and go from there.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Pichelle for the Legislative Committee.
For the Legislative Committee, Ms. Pichelle and Mr. Diaz and myself, we're going to meet on the 5th of December.
Okay.
That's going to be our meeting, the three of us, and we're going to, as far as our legislative priorities, along with information that we're going to receive from Ms. Patricia, we're going to be talking about the impact of,
With legislative priorities being the
Okay.
Impact on
that it has
minority.
on minority students.
And we're going to pick another subject also to tackle once we get the list from Patricia.
Okay.
And we're going to come up with a date that we're going to go to Austin.
Awesome.
Yeah, if they let me in the building, boy, I'm going to have something to say.
They'll let you in.
And what about the due date? The January 9th seems very ambitious. Did you all talk about that, or?
Yeah, we think we can do it, because
Okay.
we will meet together on the 5th of December.
Got it, okay. But I mean, so the due date is more so like, that's when the committee would end potentially, and it seems like you may actually want to, should we change it to May to correspond with the end of the legislative session if part of the committee work might be going to the legislature and things like that?
That makes
Or-
sense.
Okay,
I understood that this was just to stand it up and then that we would have the standing, but
no, that was for the deliverables, yeah, okay.
So, what do we do?
You're right. I was just, so the due date here was originally for whatever deliverables, like that would be the end work of the committee would be due by then. But it sounds like you want to, part of the committee work to be like going to the legislative session, speaking to legislators and things. So then.
So it would not necessarily
May,
be, yeah.
right, May seems right.
Right.
In case, unless they
Well, I would
extend,
just
yeah.
suggest, though, that you would want to bring this agenda to the full board before
Yes.
you would go to speak on it.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, we wouldn't go without.
Yeah.
Bring this to the board
Okay.
Sure.
before you go to the, yeah.
So maybe that's something you can tell us in your first meeting.
Okay.
After your first meeting is when you think you'd have like an agenda for us to consider and vote
Yeah,
on. Okay.
because you all may have some input for us.
Right, yeah, okay. All right, well, we have done all the things on our list, so let me get to, there being no further business, this meeting is adjourned at 6:54. This might be a record, Patricia.
Okay.
All right, thank you all.
Stuff without my glasses.